Well, let's talk to Klon Kitchen now, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, the Conservative think tank. Hello, Klon.
Hey, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening. Well, broadly speaking, is there any difference between your perspective and Sagar's that we just heard there? How much damage is this decision going to do?
Well, look, the extent of the damage remains to be seen, and that's going to be something that evolves over time. And it won't be just this decision, but it will also be how the Johnson government responds to the absolute follow-on pressure that he's going to be feeling. So let me give some context to this. There's the technical cybersecurity risk associated with integrating Huawei into British 5G networks, and we can talk about that for as long as you like. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons why policymakers in the United States are looking at this decision and getting seriously concerned is because it's understood as a litmus test for how well the British government actually understands the challenge or the threat of the Chinese government. And right now, the Johnson government is failing that test. And we're at a moment in history where we need our partners and allies to fully understand what we're facing collectively.
So I would imagine, listening to you both, that the phone lines are pretty hot at the moment between Washington and London.
Yes. I mean, well, look, unfortunately, I think those of us in the United States saw this coming, at least for the last couple of days. I mean, the trend lines have been pointing this way for a long time, but many of us who operate very closely with members of your government have held out hope that frankly just rationality and a sense of self-preservation would win the day. Unfortunately, there has been sufficient confusion about how Huawei works, frankly incredible assurances that Huawei executives, like the one you had on your show just a few minutes ago, those have apparently assuaged the concerns. And, look, the reality is that a choice not to integrate Huawei certainly would be difficult and not a costless exercise for the British people. And so I understand many of the motives and desires to find an alternative way than what the United States was advocating. At the same time, there are just some basic realities that are undeniable. And if the British government continues to pursue a course of action of willful ignorance, it won't serve the government well, it won't serve the British people well, and it won't serve the United States well as we try to work with a longtime friend and ally.
And let me ask you, before we let you go, Klon, just to make the case, if you like, against Huawei, what is the American estimation, or at least what are the people that you talk to, what is their estimation of the risk that's posed by this course of action?
Yeah. So there's 3 quick points on that. One, you have to understand that the Chinese government and the Chinese industry, particularly the technology industry, are cooperative. The Chinese government funds and helps push their industry, and they use that as an extension of the government's intelligence collection apparatus. And so Huawei is a part of what they call civil-military fusion. So that's the context. The government uses private companies or semi-private companies as extensions of their intelligence collaboration. 2, there's the general cybersecurity risks associated with the company and its services. So the fact that the United Kingdom has an entire agency dedicated to assessing the ongoing risk associated with Huawei's presence in your networks in general tells you everything you need to know. And then if you read the reports for the last 3 to 5 years in terms of what they say about Huawei's inability or unwillingness to address some cybersecurity issues, you really start to get into an undeniable realization that, look, these services, Huawei, they leak like a sieve, and they're not trustworthy. But then the third point is the reality that the Chinese government, by law, considers any information, including British information, that is on networks owned by Chinese companies, they consider that information Chinese information. And by law, that information must be made available to the Chinese government. So even if somehow tomorrow Huawei secured every 5G network that it had in the United Kingdom, the reality is, despite their protestations and assurances otherwise, the reality is that by Chinese law, and they're a Chinese company headquartered in Beijing, that information has to make its way back to China and be made available to the Chinese government. So in light of all three of those things, that's why the American perspective is just, frankly, gobsmacked that the British government has decided to go this route.
Klon Kitchen at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks, Klon, very much.
Have a good evening.
25 minutes to 2.